February's end user webinar. We'll be looking at a reintroduction or introduction to MMUpdater, or as Rob put it, back to basics, Updater Edition. And today, our presenter, as always, Rob Macalack. So without further ado, Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Carnegie. And thanks everybody for joining us today. I know some of you will just get this in recording and some will do it live. Those of you who are with us live, please prepare your questions. Some of you are, probably a fair number of you are already Updater users and you're just getting refamiliarized. Some of you are MasterMine users. I actually have seen our list of attendees. It includes some very long-time MasterMine users who actually don't, some of whom don't actually even have Updater yet. As you know, Updater is our capability for changing GoldMine data from inside of Excel, and I'll go into the details of that today. It's not just well, it is in part, in some ways of using it, it is very simple. In other ways, can of course be fairly complicated. Because of course we need to, when you do update GoldMine data, you want to be doing things according to GoldMine's rules for how data should work. Let's see. As I mentioned, this session will be recorded. It'll be available later as a recording on the web. And let's step right in. So here's our agenda for today. There's a lot of content here today. So I'm going to jump right past the slides here pretty quickly, but I do just want to, I'm not even going to read down through these topics, but you can see that there are a lot of things that go beyond just simply the straightforward basic changing GoldMine fields in the Contact 1 and Contact 2 tables. This is really about managing GoldMine better, and we will go into those tasks. I'll actually come back to this view here in a moment. Facebook thing come up there. I want to come back to this list here and we'll go through them one by one, but first I wanted to just talk a little bit about Updater itself and who uses it and how you should think about assigning this. In a lot of organizations you only have one person who has Updater, and I have seen where that one user is not actually somebody who knows anything about how GoldMine is actually used. I'll get to, well, I want to talk about that a little bit more in detail about who the users are, but let's start with this. GoldMine's license, I'm sorry, Updater is linked to a GoldMine license. So just as your regular MasterMine licenses are. So in other words, when you license your Updater, you are assigning a particular GoldMine user that capability to update GoldMine. So just the word of caution that I want to provide here is, well, a couple of them. One is I've seen a lot of situations where there's only a single user within the organization who can use Updater. It's probably a good idea certainly to limit it to a limited number of users, but if you only have one and that one person leaves, all too often we find out months or years later that the one person who knew how to use Updater to actually manage GoldMine isn't there anymore, and the capability has just sort of fallen by the wayside, which is a waste of quite a number of things, not just the licensing money that you paid, but really what winds up happening is you have a large number of people within the organization starting to do very inefficiently the things that one person used to do with Updater, or you wind up hiring consultants to do it, or any number of things that are just far more expensive than simply adding a second Updater license for $300. Just a word of caution about being a little too stingy with Updater. The second thing is, who are the kinds of users who really ought to be, you can think about using Updater. In particular, most often it's what I call the GoldMine lead, the person within the organization who works with GoldMine the most. That's your sort of obvious Updater user. But a couple of other possibilities I've seen, well, one would be to have a license for your GoldMine dealer. If your GoldMine dealer, if you've got things set up so that your GoldMine dealer can log into your GoldMine from externally, a very wise thing to do is give them MMUpdater as a tool that they can use to efficiently manage your database, so that rather than have them writing SQL queries or doing things the inefficient ways that wind up taking a lot longer and costing you more, they can actually use MMUpdater itself to get that work done in, as I always like to say, in seconds rather than hours. If you don't have a GoldMine dealer and would rather work with us to actually manage your GoldMine data, you can assign a license to MasterMine. Of course, we can sort of share them if you don't mind, having us log into your GoldMine as you, if you're the GoldMine lead, in order to do this work. Then, of course, that's that you can at least kill two birds with one stone that way. The other, actually most common ways beyond those first three that I see MMUpdater get deployed is either a functional manager or an assistant. When I say functional manager, I'm talking about, let's say, the marketing manager might use GoldMine in a particular way. Of course, they're using GoldMine for marketing purposes, but they, let's say, use MMUpdater to bring in results from their MailChimp activities into GoldMine by creating history activities every time somebody clicks on one of their emails that they send out. Now that's the manager of marketing doing that, importing stuff into GoldMine, and they can use it within those narrow boundaries just fine. It's not going to mess up your GoldMine database for them to do that, because all they're doing is really creating appropriate history based on things that happened outside of GoldMine. But that's a level of usage that's perfectly fine, in addition to your whatever it is, your IT department or your sales manager or your GoldMine, whoever your GoldMine lead is, using it. And then the last one, I put in assistant. Very often the GoldMine master in the organization is actually a sales assistant or a marketing assistant, or you don't necessarily have to be high up in the executive structure to be extremely important in terms of managing the GoldMine data. So all of those are possible. I think that's probably all I need to say about that. Just a quick word about this. We, of course, if we are doing work for you in your GoldMine database, all the things that I'm going to talk about today in terms of working with GoldMine data can be done remotely. In our case, we offer support. I put in training in parentheses there, because you can really use us online through GoToMeeting or TeamViewer, or actually working on your system, creating MasterMine reports for you, which again is just a far more efficient way of arriving at your end goal of having reports or having your data organized how you need it, than a lot of other options. And finally, I do want to mention, actually this relates more to the support thing, and that is there are training videos available online. This one that we're doing today will be an example of one, on how to use MasterMine and how to use MMUpdater. Okay, so one other thing before we get started, and this has to do just with us, our live user community, by which I'm talking about those of you right now on the webinar and who come to see us every month in these webinars. I just want to get some information from you regarding how we can improve the way we do this. And so this month, what I'm asking is, I've got a couple of sort of broader suggestions about how we can work together. I'm going to put up a poll in just a moment. And I want to ask you about certain possibilities. So one is, our dream way of doing this monthly end user event is to actually have a lot more interaction between us and you. And that means, well, some various different possibilities. So the first possibility is what I call an open problem solving kind of a meeting, where the presenter for that, I would still be the main presenter, but we would actually be able to present the screen of whoever's asking the question and allow you to actually show, here's a problem I'm trying to solve, here's a report I'm trying to create, here's some data I need to manage, what's the best way to do this, and actually show that in our webinar. That's option number one, and what we're going to ask here at the end in the poll is just simply, would you participate? Would you actually want to potentially show something like this? Or alternatively, if you're interested in any one of these, but really you would only be able to watch, we'll give you that possibility as well. Second possibility is an open mic kind of a situation where you could come into the webinar with your questions, but again, there would be your problems and such, but we would not actually show your screen. Some people may have some concerns about, the possibility of people outside their organization actually seeing their data, their GoldMine data, and there's, reasonable concern there. So we might do this purely by audio, or we might do it with just screenshots from your side. So that's option number 2, what I call the open mic option. And we could do some mix of those where, for example, we might in advance create a report with you that you're okay with people seeing, and then we show that in the webinar. Option 3 is a more open thing where, just for the purpose of creating topics, for figuring out what are the best things to talk that would be useful for us to talk about, because obviously this is free. This is your opportunity to learn about using MasterMine, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, as opposed to the online support options. But the second thing is also to kind of open up the possibility of the kind of a many-to-many support arrangement. So you would get to know other users of MasterMine through a phone conference, and actually in the course of discussing what topics would be appropriate for our live monthly end user event, you would also get to know those people and maybe get some ideas from them as well. So I'm just going to put up the poll right now quickly, give you a chance to say whether or not you would participate in this. And Carnegie, I think you just put it up there, right?
I did.
You did, okay. So the poll is up there. So those of you who are on, if you could just go ahead and choose one of those options. The last one is, yeah, I'd be interested in one of those things, but really I would only be an observer. I couldn't possibly actually present or participate in presenting. But if you would do one of those ones at the top, this will register your interest, and we'll either talk with you individually about it, or we'll just put this out in the future. Okay, so just a couple seconds more for the poll for you to answer on the poll there. And thank you very much for that. Let's jump into the actual topic at hand today. So I'm going to come back to our to our agenda here, and I'm going to switch over and let's go live. So here, as usual, is our GoldMine database, and we're going to spend the next half hour or so, half hour to 45 minutes, talking about the specific ways of working with GoldMine, working with GoldMine and MasterMine and MMUpdater all together to perform some GoldMine administration, as well as just sort of general data management tasks. And what I'm going to start with here is I'll just go ahead and launch a report that I created in the past. We won't do too much in the way of creating new reports in this webinar, although if you've got questions about that, of course, I'll handle those toward the end. So what I'm opening here is a report called Lead Management. I've got it on my Sales Manager's taskbar in GoldMine, and I popped it up. It refreshed with our current GoldMine data. So this is just our workbook that's got 6 different tabs in it. You can see down at the bottom, and just to sort of set the context, this is as a Sales Manager's report. This is a way of seeing who has what quality of leads as scored by an ABC kind of a scale, who has those assigned to them, and as you can see, we've got other fields in here, such as using the last contact date, and I've covered in these webinars enough, I think, talking about actually generating a report that includes a field of when they were last contacted, not the GoldMine built-in last contact date, because that one I think tends to be kind of useless, because it gets updated every time you send out an email to somebody. But an actual genuine last contact according to your definition of what an actual contact is. Someone was spoken with, it had certain, let's say, result codes in it to indicate that that a real conversation was had, and or a high value activity was accomplished. And so what you want to know is, as a sales manager looking at this report, of the leads that are assigned to a given sales rep that are, let's say, high value, meaning they have a score of A, B, or C, or maybe A or B, when were they last contacted, and what are we going to do about it? Ultimately, with Updater, it's really, the question is, what are you going to do about it, and what can you do on a kind of a large scale in terms of managing GoldMine records? Okay, so that's where we're going to go, and that's the scenario that I'm using here. In the course of sort of playing out this scenario, of course, we'll go into the nuts and bolts of how we use UpDater itself to accomplish this, but I just want to sort of set that basis. So here I'm a sales manager. I'm looking at my database of leads that shows me how many A, B, and C leads each of these people have. And in particular, I think what I want to do here is I'm going to rearrange this report a little bit so that I can see, I'm really interested in the highest value leads, the ones that are scored A, and when they were last contacted, because maybe I want to reassign those leads that haven't been contacted recently. That would be a fairly good example. So I'm going to take the score field out and move it up to the filtering area and just filter on the A leads. Now, you may not have a score field in GoldMine. A quick switch over to GoldMine here. I'm just pointing out we used one of the key fields for a score field here. This could be, this could be an objective criteria that make this an A, B, or C according to, how large is the customer and or prospect. Their dollar potential, overall dollar potential for buying from you. It could also be a completely subjective thing like the sales rep's estimate of how important they are. Or it could be some combination of those objective and subjective criteria that wind up with an A, B, or C in there. I always think it's a great idea to score your leads, especially if you're looking at thousands or tens of thousands of leads in your database. It's the best way to help the highest value prospects get the highest value of contact. So back to the report, again, where I'm segmenting here by score. Sales reps going across in rows, and the year the person was last contacted. Again, this is just derived from one of the many formulas that we've talked about in previous webinars. So if it says none, that means they've literally never. There is no completed activity in GoldMine that indicates they have been worked with before. Now, one of the things we might want to do is actually drill down to find out, well, who is under these numbers. Now, drilling down, of course, gives you a good understanding of what you're looking at before you go and do something with UpDater to change the information around. It's best to have a good idea of what it is that you're looking at, and that also helps you to just understand this report. So, for example, we might double-click on Lori S's 8 A's that are listed here. This report actually includes notes, but I'm not interested in the notes right now. So these are ones that have never been contacted before, which is why we have all these blank history items here. But we can see who they are, and if we look farther over here to the right, we'll see whatever other fields that I included when I created the report. We've got some that are suspects, some that are past clients, and so on. And by the way, just looking at the data like this might remind you, oh, that's right, I forgot to filter on record types so that I know that I'm excluding, say, past clients, because it's perfectly understandable that we haven't contacted past clients anytime recently if past client means like literally they're not a client anymore and they never will be again, if that's the meaning in our database. So that being the case, we probably want to go up here based on what we just saw in the drill down and change our report a little bit. Take the record type, move it up to the filtering area, and exclude past clients. So I just did several moves there at the same time. I dragged the record type in. I did the drop down for record type. I set this down here so that it allows us to select multiple items instead of just a single one. And I left them all checked on, but I unchecked past client. And for now, that will suffice, I think. Now, as I'm in there, I might also consider, there were past clients there under the ones that I happen to drill down on, but I can recognize, oh, in this context, I really shouldn't be interested in vendors or employees, but everybody else that I'm seeing in there looks like all the other record types probably are valid, so I'll go ahead and, having excluded those, hit OK. Okay. Now, what am I interested in? Let's move on to the actual updating of data. So I've got A leads here that have never been contacted for certain users. And again, in context, I need to decide what do I want to do with these. Well, maybe Lori S isn't on our team anymore, and her leads all need to be reassigned. Maybe somebody else, Tina L, she still works with us, and she's got a fair number of leads that have been, well, contacted, let's say, relatively recently, but one of them that's fairly old in 2013 and 8 of them that have never been contacted. Let's, for the moment, let's go for that segment. Now, you might do this by entire swaths of them. You might double-click on the 38 so you can address all 38 of the ones that have never been contacted, regardless of who the sales rep is. But I'm going to do this a little bit more critically here. I'm going to drill down on Tina L's. Again, we don't need to see the notes wrapped together. And in particular, all I'm going to do is a straightforward update where I'm going to change the sales rep in the sales rep field from Tina L to somebody else. Now, since I'm reassigning leads, I could just say, well, let's just switch all these over to one other sales rep. Change it right there, change it down the rest of the column. Oh, I went one too far, but that's okay. These are the ones, so these 8 records are the ones I'm going to update here. And then to invoke MMUpdater, go to the MasterMine drill down, toolbar, choose Updater. And now there are lots of options within Updater, but we're doing the most simple one, namely the one that has no special processing associated with it. It's really just we want to change that value that's in that one field, in the sales rep field, to a different value. So, and because this is fairly straightforward, it's just contact one, our dialog here recognizes that it's the sales rep field on the GoldMine side that's going to be replaced with the contents of the sales rep column in the MasterMine report. Of course, you can rename fields inside of MasterMine, in which case they would no longer match up. So you would have to know that that it was a different. You'd be able to actually select which column contains the data that you wanted to update. But for the most part, if you're not making changes to your field names, things will match up fairly well once you get into Updater here. So that update is a fairly straightforward one. I'm going to take this off of test run, and I'm going to hit the OK button. So that's basically really all I need to do to get those 8 records cleaned up. So I'm going to hit the OK button here, and when I do, it's going to create a new log sheet inside of GoldMine. You'll see a tab up here on the bottom left here, and it will run through them and do the updating. It happens obviously pretty quickly. Actually, let's do this. It's the message that I got there. It said it found a blank in the match field, and the reason is, if you look up here, our match field is the CH account no field, meaning it's looking at the contact one table, but it's looking at the account number of the history item. The CH is the history item, where versus the C1, which you hopefully can see up here in the top right. C1 means contact one, that's the account number of the actual contact record. The reason it's blank is these happen to be records that have no history. Since they have no history, they also have no history record account number field. So I want to choose instead the other account number, the main record, the contact account number, and try this again. We'll hit OK. 8 records are updated on the GoldMine side, and let's just verify that. Let's double click on one of these. We'll drill through to Bax Global Corporation, so I just double clicked on it there. And as we can see here, the sales rep now says Nancy H instead of Tina, which is what it used to say. Okay, so, and if that's all we're doing, if updating that one small set was our only reason for coming in here, then we'd be all set. We could go back to our lead assignment report. You can see the 8 are still here under Tina L, but if we refresh our data, those 8 will now be under Nancy H. So let's talk about a couple of alternative approaches to that very simple update. And even before that, let me just say, okay, that's one example of updating some contact level data. There were only 8 of them, but there could have been 8,000 or 80,000 of them. And obviously, the larger the number, the more the variety in how you do this, the more valuable MMUpdater would be to you versus whatever alternatives you might think of. So let's go back to what I want to do actually is look at the changes that we made. So I'm going back to the drill down sheet. This is the original drill down sheet that we created when I drilled down on Nancy's 8 things. Suppose instead of changing them all to one other person, we wanted to change them we wanted to, let's say, round robin them between 3 sales reps. We wanted Nancy H to get the first one, but Lori S to get the second one, and Rob M to get the third one, and then we wanted to round robin them all the way down. So one of the options here is put in your 3 at the time for the first 3, and when I double click on the bottom right hand side, or corner rather, it just goes all the way down the rest of the list. Now again, this is just a short list, but if there were hundreds of them, that's a fast way to essentially round robin or distribute a set of leads among 3 different possibilities. Now again, don't let your mind just sort of stick you in the idea of this is, sales rep assignment. There's many ways that you can use these techniques to manage things in your GoldMine database. We could have distributed things across a number of dates here, for example, or we could have, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. We could also, so that's a round robin kind of approach. We could also use a formula, Excel cell formula, where we say, make the name here be dependent upon some other information in the row. This is all just using regular Excel techniques to determine who the sales rep is, but to do it again across a large number of them. Now you wouldn't do this if you're just doing 8 records, but again, if there were 8,000 of them, this is a very fast way to accomplish something. So we might say, for example, well, if the industry is aviation, then make it Nancy. If the industry is food, make it Rob. Okay, so that here we'll just put in a simple Excel formula for this. So here, instead of actually typing the literal value, we put in an equal sign and say if left paren that field equals aviation, then let's put in Nancy H. And for some of you, this is brand new, and for others, it's old hat. So just bear with me. So in this case, I'll just make it a very simple if statement. So if it's industry, make it Nancy H. If it's not, make it Rob M. So that's my formula. Then copy my formula down, and you can see, very quickly that would have accomplished a sort of contingent outcome for that data. So, and then again, you just use the updater functionality to push the changeover. So that's your simple updating from whatever you change the thing to be inside of Excel. Also want to point out, as long as I'm here, undoing. So having made these changes in my database, and remember I actually took data on the GoldMine side and I changed it from an original value to a new one. This log sheet, or any log sheet that's in MasterMine, can be, this is our original one that we did. I'm going to just delete this one out so I won't get confused by it. Okay, so this log sheet retains original and updated value, and I could save this log sheet, along with the rest of the workbook, hit save, come, oh, you know what, I didn't really want to change those. I really want those back at the original value. You actually have on the drill down menu here an undo option, which I'm going to go ahead and apply the undo. Whoops, I wanted to get back on there. I'm going to go ahead and apply the undo, and that's simple. I made a mistake before. I changed it to Nancy H. Now it's back at Tina L. So again, if I go through to the Back's Global record, you can see it says Tina L back here in the sales rep field. So with that kind of protection, you should be able to, and this kind of gets back to that discussion about who the users are and who you trust with Updater. There are protections in here. The ability to actually put it back how you found it is a pretty important one. And again, it's not just in the same session, but even in a later session, if the log sheets are saved, you can always come back and change them back. Or if you can just figure out from the context, let's look at all the ones that are, say, Nancy H., where the last time they were updated was February 25th. You could make a MasterMine report that isolates those and then updater them back to how they were originally, or to whatever you want to change them to. Okay, so that's a basic straightforward changes. Now I'd like to get into some other things related to GoldMine administration and more, let's say, complex data management tasks working with GoldMine. By the way, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to put those into the question dialog and GoToMeeting, and Carnegie will watch for those and interrupt me if as appropriate, or we'll handle them at the end of this meeting as well. So let's talk about handling, let's see, deleting and completing pending calendar items. And I actually thought I would just sort of build off of what we were doing here already, the same context. Let's suppose that not only did you want to change those leads over to a new person, in this case I just now changed them back, but actually let's go ahead and, what I'll do is I'll just take all 27 of Nancy's calls here, or Nancy's ones that have never been contacted, since now I've reassigned some leads to Nancy and she already had some not contacted ones, and I really want her to do a follow-up and call those up. So how can we handle those? Let's do this. I'm going to build a GoldMine group here, and I'm going to say NH call these. It's going to be the name of this. And so I'm building a GoldMine group. Why am I building a GoldMine group? Well, the reason is I'm going to use what's already built into GoldMine for scheduling calls, but I'm going to use it in an especially clever way here by saying, all right, I'm going to schedule a call. This is going to be old A leads with no call. Call now. Or whatever you want to put in the reference line and whatever you want to put in the notes on all of these. The target group that we're going to schedule this for is going to be that group that I just created over here, which was NH call these. Okay, and I'm going to enter these into, I'm going to schedule these to happen as a series. So rather than have them all be scheduled at the same time and date, I'll have them go, and maybe we'll start next Monday, and we'll start at 9 a.m. and we'll do 3 of them a day, skipping the weekends. This is all just using what's built into GoldMine to schedule some activities. Okay, so now I've just created 25 pending calls, and oops, I made a mistake. And there are a lot of different moving parts to working with GoldMine, and this is one of the great reasons to have Updater, is that you will process things like I just did, but you'll leave out one step. You'll do one thing not quite right. And then rather than go back and start from scratch by, let's say, finding all these pending activities and deleting them, which I'm not even quite sure how you would do that in GoldMine and without MasterMine, but I'm gonna actually do it here in a way that you can actually have some better control over. So now here's the problem. The user on these are all me because I did the scheduling here. I didn't schedule that call to be done by the sales rep. Now some of these, remember, we've put the sales rep back to Tina L on some of these, but that's okay. So I want to change these over to where the sales rep is going to be, or to where the user is going to be actually the right person instead of me. So I've done a useful thing in GoldMine, but I need to fix it. So let's go ahead and create a MasterMine report, and I'm going to focus on these pending calls. So how do I make a report that's going to focus on those pending calls? Well, all these calls are associated with a GoldMine group that I just created. So, one thing I could do is just say, let's just look at all the pending calls that I created today. That would be one approach to it. But I want to just demonstrate a couple of other functions in here. So I'm going to do a pending calls report. Now, as with those settings, if I just hit the finish button, of course, that will give me every pending call in my database, and then I would need to use my settings inside the report to narrow down to only ones that were created today, maybe even only ones that were created at the time, 4 minutes ago or whatever. It's actually at 2:20, no, excuse me, all the ones that were created 1:32 today. on 225. So those, I could use those criteria. I would just have to make sure that I include the CA create time and create on fields, which are, here's the, here's the, there we are, create, that's create by, that's by me. This is create on and create at. So those are the two fields that correspond to the date and the time they were created. So I could just use that to filter them. I'll go ahead and include those fields here. But I'm also going to do something else. I'm going to filter. I'm going to only include those records that are in this group. I'm filtering on a group, so to speak, to mix some nomenclature there. So here I can choose, and again, this is something I'm doing it for this purpose that I'm doing today, but a lot of people I think don't even realize you can use GoldMine groups as the basis for any kind of MasterMine report. And what's really nice about a group is the group persists. Members of a group remain members of that group even after the criteria that got them into the group change in the GoldMine database, unlike or in contrast to filters. Now I just have to remember how did I name that group, because I've got a lot of them in here. Carnegie, if you can help me.
NH call these.
Thank you, NH call these. There we go. All right, so that will be my group, and you can see that. But when I choose that group, that becomes by default a part of my report name when I create these. That's okay. I'll just take the default report name here and generate the report. So I've got a conflict. I got two different versions of the create on field. There's the record when the contact record was created is one create on, and then the CA create on is the date that the call was created. I'm actually going to call this the lead date, or the lead create date, or something like that, to distinguish them. And our report is complete, and we will come up in Excel. So once again in Excel here, we've got these are the members of, or sorry, the members of the group are actually, if I show you the individual companies, these are the individual members. If you recall, my issue was I'm concerned about the ones. Now these are all of the pending calls for the members of that group. So this is not exactly all that I want here. So it's actually a good thing that I have my create on, create at fields in here. So ones that were created, let's say today, which is, whoops, that's my blue create on field. Didn't I change? You know what? I might have gotten these backwards. Let's see. Yep, I did get it backwards. So I named my field wrong when I did that. So, by the way, it's good to have these colors on the fields. Create on, I knew that there was something wrong with you choosing that one, because that's blue. Blue means it's a contact level field, like company, contact name, and so on. Green, if you can see the distinction here through GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, the green indicates that's a date field, or that's a field that's in the calendar record of the scheduled call. So by specifying today's date as the date that this was created, and maybe even going further to the create at field, and making sure that we're just looking at the ones that were created at, what did I say was the appropriate time for those? 1:32, which is 13:32 in military time. So create at 13:32. That gets me down to exactly the pending activities that we need to fix. So with that list, I'm going to double click, see the list there. Remember, our issue was I put the wrong user ID on there, so very quickly I could go in here and just say, let's switch that over to Nancy as the user ID, and then the rest of it is just the straightforward updater session. We're going to update the pending table because it's pending activities that we're fixing the username on, take it off test run, and away we go. Okay, records fixed.
And you don't necessarily have to go by time that you made it. You had a very unique reference as well. Just pointing that out.
Oh, that's, yeah, good point. I could have just once, yeah, very good point. I could have just said, let's pull the reference field in there and we'll see they all have that same reference in there, old A leads with no call. So I could have just filtered based on that, and it would have got me the same set. Okay. So
I'm here to simplify.
Yeah, thank you. Oftentimes, coming up with the right strategies for doing with these things just is really a matter of just kind of thinking it through a little bit, and easier if you're not running a webinar while you're doing it. But that's just an excuse. Let's move on to the next thing here. Cleaning email inboxes. That is actually just another way of, this is one that I'm just going to sort of point to rather than go into in detail. Well, actually,
I actually have a question on this somewhat.
Okay.
Not from me. Monica asked, what solutions do you have for separating two companies with similar file record names? We're trying to retroactively separate hundreds of email history corporate from local store records. Or is this something we should take offline and talk individually?
That sounds like something to talk with them individually about. I think I'm
okay.
a little too far down a certain path.
Monica, we'll give you a call after the webinar.
Sounds good. Inbox tree. So there is a template built into MasterMine that will give you your tree of inboxes. When I say tree, what we're referring to here is, as I'm sure you're probably, those of you who use GoldMine email client, you hopefully know that you can have many users, each of whom has their own tree or let's say directory or subdirectories of emails. In this case, by default, in this case, our report, our demo database only has emails under the user Rob. But if I had 10 different users, I could be looking at the email inboxes of 10 different people. Now, this will not give you a view of the contents of their emails. All you can see here is reference lines and subfolders and that sort of thing. But the point of this is really crucial to GoldMine administration. Namely, email inboxes fill up. Well, they don't fill up, but they don't fill up. They just keep on growing and growing and growing. And if somebody isn't there tending to them, eventually the GoldMine administrator could find that GoldMine itself has started to slow down, or it has started to get in certain contexts just more difficult to work with. And so what are you going to do about that as a GoldMine administrator? Hopefully what you will do is manage the what I call out of control email inboxes. If you've got, let's say, a user who left the company and there's 2,000 emails there, as a matter of fact, if under certain circumstances the way your GoldMine might be set up, they could still be just receiving emails that don't that are going to a ghost email inbox and not being dealt with, and so they're just building up and building up. Maybe a somewhat less extreme example would be just simply, somebody who's still working there has, let's say, just a couple of thousand emails in their inbox, and if you think that that's not possible, I can tell you the majority of people, by far the majority of people who use email, which is, of course, everybody in the modern world, does not empty out their inbox routinely, does not actually stay on top of their emails at all times. So what are you going to do about that? Well, you could just simply delete them out. I'll show you a couple of examples. You can delete them or you can complete them using Updater. Let's take these 13 personal ones for under Rob. So let's suppose what I wanted to do is simply, I know that they're personal. How do I know they're personal? Because they were in the personal inbox. Now this is by subfolder. We might also do this by the company that they're associated with in our database. Some of these might be our customers, and we want to treat them one way, and they're prospects, and we want to treat those a different way. So lots, you can bring to bear any number of criteria for deciding what you're going to do with them. delete, complete, or leave alone. So I just happen to choose some, but let's take all these ones here. I'm going to double click on those. 17 of those. And let's say what I want to do here, just to kind of demonstrate the updater capability, is I want to actually delete those messages out of my inbox. So when Updater is going to stop you and say, have you backed up, it is always a good idea to back up your GoldMine database before doing mass changes. But here we're talking about a very small number of and relatively unimportant stuff. So go ahead and say OK.
I chime in with that. That little warning is just, it's also a heads up to everybody that this is something that can't be undone. When you see that warning, it might not be
okay.
do that well, but when you see that warning, you know, when you have a log sheet, you can come back and undo things, but when you have that warning, it's something that cannot be undone later. So it's just kind of a red flag.
Yeah. Okay. So and so basically that's what you would do, is you would just hit delete. Now I don't actually want to do a permanent change to my demo database, so I'm just going to leave that one. But just to kind of show you the other alternatives, you may decide, you know what, we don't actually want to destroy these emails. We just want to, because you know, after all, they're, you know, they may not be advertising. They might be some, you know, something that's more useful. We just want to complete them over into history so that they're not bogging down our inbox system, our email system. So you could take a whole set of them here, for example, and file the email messages, and it'll ask you what do you want to put a result code in those. It defaults to AFL, which is automatic file, but you can change that to any other three-letter code you want to. That one's going to be fine. And then if I hit the OK button, that would file these, and they would just simply disappear out of the inbox. So well, I think that's all I want to say about mail management, except to say that you know, you do have also not just mail, but also analogous things that you can do with pending activities, past due pending activities. Do you want to file them? Do you want to delete them? Do you want to reassign them to somebody else? All of those are easy possibilities right here. All you have to do is isolate them on a spreadsheet using your MasterMine report, and then do the appropriate thing with them. It's quite easy to do, by working with the right tab here. Let's see. Cleaning out email inboxes. Okay. Next topic is managing email addresses and websites. So email address and website, these are just additional tabs here under the Updater dialog. Why does this look so complicated? Well, email address, as you know, there's not just one single email address associated with each contact in GoldMine. A main contact can have multiple email addresses just for them. A contact record can have additional contacts underneath it, each of whom has its own email address associated with it. And so these tools actually make it much easier for you, even though you're in a spreadsheet situation, which is a simple, you know, list kind of approach to the data. The tools will help you to avoid making any mistakes as you're updating things. This will actually allow you to fill in if you've got a list, let's say, of leads that came in from a trade show, and 3/4 of them have email addresses, but 1/4 of them don't, and you want somebody to you know, call up and fill in on the spreadsheet the emails that are missing, and then run your updater. This will allow you essentially to you know, clean up an email list that otherwise is full of gaps. There's a lot of different ways of approaching that. Another thing, rather than have a list come from a trade show, you actually generate your list from out of MasterMine. And what's a good example? Oh, where you have distributors, and you're the main company doing the marketing. You've got a list of leads that you know the distributor is managing, but that distributor didn't supply you with all the email addresses for them. You could actually, out of GoldMine, generate a list of the ones with missing email addresses, send that list just as an email spreadsheet to your distributor. They don't have to have GoldMine. Ask them to please, fill in the email addresses on the spreadsheet. They send you the spreadsheet back. You run Updater, pops all those. It actually creates new email records inside of GoldMine, and you're good to go. A lot of different ways that, as a process, you should be able to either fix GoldMine in place, or as in the scenario I just said, actually work with people outside of your system, outside of GoldMine, even outside of your company, to get your GoldMine data fixed, and to do that on a mass basis instead of one by one. I won't go into websites any different. Website is not a lot different. It's just somewhat simpler in large part because most organizations really just keep one website per contact record in GoldMine. Okay, so then the last kind of major way of working with GoldMine data is that Updater is really helpful for is, and it sounds kind of simple, creating history entries from, let me back up here, creating history entries for the selected rows. Now, what this means is you can start with data that is not necessarily GoldMine history. So, for example, if you were looking at a set like, you sent email using an outside service to a set of GoldMine records that you have in a group in GoldMine, and you created a MasterMine report, let's say either to create that group, or you created the MasterMine report after the fact, but limited it to the members of that group. So you're looking at a spreadsheet inside of Excel, inside of MasterMine, that is a list of GoldMine contacts. Okay, but your ambition, or what you want to try to do, is to create history records that indicate that you did some activity with them. You met them at a trade show. You sent an email. You had a package sent to each one of them for marketing purposes. You did something else with them. In other words, the activity happened not inside of GoldMine, so no history in GoldMine was created. But you want to have that activity show up here. By the way, another very common example, you use MailChimp as an outside marketing service. You upload and sent out emails to them, and some people responded to those emails, and you want that response downloaded from MailChimp in the form of a spreadsheet typically. You want that response to actually create a history item in GoldMine saying they responded to this marketing piece that you sent. And if there's history in GoldMine, that means you can then use your MasterMine reports for making sure that there's follow-up, for assigning, for scheduling pending next actions, for all the things that you might want to do, for that matter, for measuring the effectiveness of your marketing if the history is getting created. So what this dialog does is allows us to say, okay, it's going to go down this list. It's going to find for each one of the companies represented here. It's going to create a history item, and you have the ability here to choose. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but basically for all of the fields that are on the screen here, all the fields that are in history, you can choose what value is going to go into that history record when it gets created, either by pulling from a row or pulling from a column on the sheet, or doing a constant value where you assign the same value to all of them. So for example, well, these all are Rob anyway, but if they were all different mail users, we could go here and say, use the mail user column, mail, date, mail.
Third one in there.
Yeah, yep, thank you very much. So for example, that one, or have a different reference depending upon where they are or whatever. So this would be a way of creating history in GoldMine. All right, so we're getting very close to the end of our hour. I wanted to give you those suggestions about better ways to use MasterMine to manage your GoldMine. Let's switch back here and summarize and give you our winner, our drawing, of course, for the week. The last thing, so I'm going to take your questions if any other questions have come up here, and I'll do that here in just a moment. But I did want to say a word just about assigning managing updater licenses. Basically, it's a little bit more complicated because a MasterMine license is dependent. An updater license is dependent on a MasterMine license, which is dependent itself on a GoldMine license. If you have more than one updater license, or if you need to shift your updater license from one user to another, at this point, the best thing to do is just call us, and we can help to sort that out. I think that's aside from what I said before about really applying the updater licensing to more than one person. I think that's, I've covered that all I need to. All right, so we have our attendee drawing. So for those of you, this is our way of attracting you in to be with us live on a monthly basis rather than just watching the recording. You can not only win a half-hour free consultation, you can get your questions posted and answered. With that, Carnegie, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and draw the name out of the barrel of attendees here and choose who's going to get our half-hour free consultation.
Our winner today is Melissa Allen.
Melissa, congratulations. And you will be, Carnegie will get in contact with you about scheduling a time to work with us. And typically this will be, for updater purposes. Although it could be really anything related to MasterMine. All right. I thought I had one. Oh, actually, that was my last one because it's got my name, my contact information on there. So for those of you who won't be staying for the questions, or if there are no questions, thank you all very much for your time today. As usual, it is a pleasure to work with you with MasterMine. Want to really encourage you to think about how we can better make use of the fact that there are many of us who use Updater on a day-to-day basis and can potentially help others. You're not alone if you're an Updater user. That's the message I especially want to get out in all of this. There is help. It's either us online, it's your dealer online, it's potentially other users either online or over the phone. So with that, thank you all very much. And Carnegie, if there are any questions, we can deal with those now.
There's not, unless we want to talk about Monica's question now that the webinar's kind of over. Or do we want to just call after? We'll call.
Do you think they're calling it? Okay. I'm thinking that that's probably best because it seems like a very specific question.
Okay. We'll do that.
Unless I misunderstood it. But okay, let's do that. With that, thank you all very much and have a great month.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.